What's up, everyone? You're listening to Vibe Check with me, DeWoofy, and we've got an incredible episode today. I first got to meet our guest, Coach Kevin Cole, through friend of the show, Les Gray. Since getting to know him, I've come to deeply respect and appreciate both his knowledge and ability to communicate on topics like authenticity, vulnerability, and trust. There's a ton of knowledge in the episode today, so I hope you can take some of that with you on your own personal journey as well. Now, without further ado, here's Vibe Check 10 with Coach Cole. We're back with Vibe Check. Yes. I'd say about 60% of the people do the clap with me. We're here with Coach Cole. I'm so excited. You can tell we're all smiles. We've been having a great conversation already. Introduced to me through the legendary Les, who is also a guest on the podcast. And I'm so happy to have you here, man. I think I'm trying to do a little more introductions when we do this and sort of my perspective on why I think it's really special that you're here. And we had a couple different conversations initially around education, but then after that, some other topics, which I thought were really interesting. So you're, a coach. I think you have some incredible thought processes, which have already helped me a lot, even during this time of sort of getting my podcast going. And I thought it was really, well, one, I just think it's valuable to share valuable things with my audience, but two, you also have a very interesting presence on Farcaster, which obviously this podcast is Farcaster coded. So with that, I will let you introduce yourself, though, and tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, David, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So my name is Kevin Cole, or Coach Cole. I do three things. So I'm an executive performance coach for individuals and teams. I help them optimize. I'm a founding coach for 2 AI companies. And I'm a member of an organization called Execu Insight. And that allows me to give talks, trainings, and seminars to industry leaders around the country. Most of the coaching, in terms of my coaching journey that I do, is in the space that we're talking about. So like Farcaster Frontier Tech, AI, crypto, Web3 is where I do most of my coaching. And what I love about that is I have the huge privilege of being able to support individuals that are building the future. I mean that literally, and I find that very inspiring. So that's what I get to do as a coach. Before coaching, I spent about 15 years working in schools. So I was a dean in some of the most fantastic independent schools in the country. And that took me from Atlanta to Alexandria to LA, where I spent a handful of years, where my daughter was born, and then North Carolina. I earned a master's in organizational leadership from Columbia University undergrad, from the University of Virginia. While I was at Virginia, I played lacrosse and had a chance to win a national championship, successfully won a national championship, I should say, with my teammates in 2006. So that was a huge moment for me as a student athlete, the culmination of a lot of goals that I had. But it's also something I bring into my work now as a coach, working with individuals and teams, helping them think more like elite athletes or elite sports organizations. And I think very much life is a team sport. I think like any great team sport, it really matters who you get a chance to connect with. So I'm thrilled. I'm grateful, that you and I had a chance to link up when I had some questions about Montessori education for one of the organizations that I'm supporting. Also, to see where this conversation will take us. If I've learned anything as a coach, it's that conversations can be powerful and go anywhere. And so I think the same is true here. I think I have a sense of what we'll talk about, but of course, I imagine it will unfold.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. I feel like a deep presence when you speak that like sort of grounds me, which I hope the readers will sense as well, both directly from you, where I'm sure they'll get it, and hopefully from my side as well. But we did meet through Farcaster. We met through Les Gray, one of the connections I'm most happy to have been able to make. And I have this sense, I think Farcaster as a microcosm, but also broadly in sort of the world, that people are very frequently looking for more authentic interactions with each other. And this is sort of a pendulum that swings, is sort of my take after reading through history. And there was an era there of very whitewashed marketing and centralization, both on the tech and sort of storytelling side, which played out as exactly as you would. But now, to get a little meme, if you think about like, Brat Summer or like these Kamala coconuts, there's a lot of things going on where it's, I guess the trite way to possibly say it on a podcast like Vibe Check is it's just kind of vibes now. But I think there's something very deep there that I think is really interesting that's happening. So with that in mind, I would love to hear a little bit about how you found Farcaster, what you've been doing there, and anything interesting that has sort of kept you around in a world where I think both individuals and brands and companies are looking to engage in sort of a different manner than possibly have over what we'll call the Web 2 arc of the iPhone launch to today, something like that, right? And I suspect you'll have very unique perspective, having coached some companies in how to engage in these authentic practices. But I'd also love to hear some sort of your personal experience on how things have been and what you've been enjoying, or also completely open to things that have not gone well.
It's a great question. So I'll begin with a number. So I'm 39 years old now, and I began social media at 37.
Long time listener.
Yeah. So I have a lot of wisdom on this subject. I got into social media. So right about the time when I was transitioning out of working in schools and doing the coaching thing in a more full-time capacity, I started out coaching individuals in the evenings and on the weekends. I wanted to coach people that inspired me. And so at that point, what I was noticing is something interesting. Like a lot of the smartest folks that I knew were heading in the direction of AI, crypto. Well, more crypto and Web3 then, and DeFi, and more lately AI. Although some people have stayed the course, as you know. And so, but those individuals that I was supporting said, "Look, you really got to get on Twitter. You really got to get on LinkedIn." Most of my coaching friends were saying you got to get on LinkedIn, and so I started building out a profile, not having any idea what I was doing, just sort of watching what people were doing. And I'm on Twitter and noticing that it was like trying to figure out kind of, in many ways, I'm still doing this, trying to figure out like what is going to land well with people. And so I started following some people that I supported were following or engaging in conversation. And I think this was about 2 years ago, maybe a little bit less. Dan posted something about Farcaster on Twitter. And I was like, well, this is interesting. This is a space that I really enjoy hanging out in. I'm a non-technical individual, so I'm an outsider bringing that perspective. But if this is where a lot of the people that I like coaching hang out, then it would make sense to hang out there. So I sent him a DM and basically said, I'm an executive coach. I support CEOs and founding teams. Many of them are in these spaces, AI, crypto, Web3. I would love an invite. Got right back to me. He said, here you go. So I sort of stumbled in, and I don't know if you've ever had this moment where you're just sort of like, what the hell am I doing here? And you walk into a space and you're sort of immediately confronted. You imagine going back to middle school, like walking in the dance, and you're like, oh, okay, here we are. I'm in my challenge zone at the moment. And so I'm on Farcaster, engaging with super smart individuals. And so I had a friend. I'm not going to throw them under the bus on this pod, but I had a friend that said, that reached out to me. They see me as a more tech-friendly individual in their life. And they said, I'm trying to learn Microsoft Excel. And I'm like, well, I don't know how the hell to, but I know some people that I think might have a good answer to this. So I posted this. It was about 2 years ago. I posted this on Farcaster thinking, why not? If somebody on Farcaster can't answer this question, then it can't be answered. So this is like the most viral post that I've had. I'm putting it in quotations. Okay. So I think this is important because this sets the foundation for how you, so this is what I posted. I said, asking for a friend, truly, where do you go to learn Excel? And the responses were unbelievable. I'm going to read some. To a local Excel training class in 1994. This is what Les posted. Holy shit, this made me fall out of my seat. Let's see. Google search when I'm stymied. But here's what's cool. Dan eventually responded. And he goes, I would imagine GPT spreadsheet is only a year or two off. And so my point in all of this, David, is that I think when you're new to a space, how people treat you makes such an impression. You know, when you're new to a space, how individuals treat you makes such an impression, for better and for worse. I mean, that impression can be positive or negative. But how those individuals treat you when you join, in this case, Farcaster, or an organization or a team, it can have such a profound impact. And so what I really appreciated about that was people were ribbing me, were giving me a hard time. And to me, that's a sign of affection. It's like there's humor there. And I appreciate that. And, you know, these folks have something to say, but they're not taking themselves too seriously. And one of the guys who started this took time to chime in and give me feedback. And that has been consistent ever since. So going on about 2 years now. So I think your question about authenticity is really important because as a coach, the number one thing for me is establishing trust. If I can't establish trust with the person that I'm supporting, we're not going to get anywhere. They're not going to feel, there's not going to be psychological safety for them to be vulnerable. And vulnerability is important, or authenticity is important because it allows that individual to take good risks. And when they're able to take good risks in the conversation that we're having, they're able to gain new awareness. And once they have that, then they have the ability to shift behavior if they want to. So I think of it as the precondition for all good work. You've got to have authenticity because it helps build trust. And that allows people to take good risks. There was an interesting experiment. I can't remember the details, but they had 2 groups of people go through an interview process. And one group spilled coffee. They made mistakes. The other group, all buttoned up, didn't do that. Which group do you think was likelier to get hired?
I mean, my gut says to go against my gut.
Shoot from your
I'm
hip.
gonna guess it's the coffee spillers.
Yeah, because people saw them as human.
Right.
And I think that's really important. I think that's really important. But that can be hard because you feel like, you know, what's at stake for you? I don't want people to judge me. I don't want people to think that I don't belong here or I can't hack it. But oftentimes doing the opposite of what your inside voice is telling you is going to get you to where you want to go.
Yeah. Pause for 1 second. Someone's at the door.
Yeah.
I'm so good. All right, we're back. Apologies for the interruption. You said a lot of really incredible things in there. I think in particular, the idea of taking good risks really stood out to me because it's just such great universal advice. I very felt myself like being the real me, whatever that stands for. When I first showed up to Farcaster, it did feel like a risk, but it did feel like a place where I was able to do so. And I know that as the network gets larger, it feels more imposing, I think, for people joining the network to show up. I suppose that a larger and larger middle school dance is possibly one way to frame that, right? Like when you're at a smaller school, I mean, maybe when it's more intimate, it can still feel just as alarming, I suppose. But I think taking good risks is just so beautiful because you can think about it at a deep sort of personal level. But to any founder who's building any sort of network, that's building any protocol, anything where something is interacting, right? Where there's some sort of an exchange happening, from technical node operators to, you know, social networks to customers and service providers. This idea of creating a space where you can take good risks something that I think is really palatable and really poignant. I do feel like I'm showing up to a middle school dance sort of every day, very frequently. Sometimes I feel like that's what most of my life is. But I love some of those ideas that you tapped in on. I think as far as the coaching goes, I'd like to talk or hear your thoughts a little bit more on sort of what you're seeing, in the space today. What are some of the highest leverage points that you've worked with people on? And obviously, nothing's a replacement for signing up for the session with Coach Cole. But in an effort to sort of put wisdom into the universe and also have people, potentially excited to work with you one-on-one or company on one, however it's defined. Would love to hear how some of those things you were talking about. I assume there will be parallels between, bringing yourself to the Farcaster network and what you work on with people on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question. I want to kick it back for a second. When you hear the word coach, what comes to mind?
Well, I didn't know that you were a lacrosse champion. It does explain quite a bit. I will be honest in like my lack of assessment, if that makes sense.
Hey.
Because there are Vince Lombardis that come to mind.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pair, or Steve Kerrs and Phil Jacksons, and I think that's probably a part of it. My therapist also comes to mind, and I know that's not it, but I know it's a part of it. And I keep one foot in the traditional finance world, where I used to work for a financial advisor. And I've always sort of had the opinion, and shared by what I would consider most very successful financial advisors, that it's about 10% managing money and about 90% armchair therapist for your clients, but only talking about money. So all of these images come to my mind. I don't know, and maybe it's varied. Maybe the answer is it's all of it. Maybe the answer is none of it. But I hope that's enough of a basis to then kick it back to you again.
Okay. No, I think this is important because this is one of the most common questions I get, David, is tell me what exactly is coaching? And I think this is, if I asked an individual to draw a coach, I think people would pretty much like check off all the items on a rubric. But I think we've made this too difficult, honestly. And so a lot of what I do is more in the direction of, less in the direction of graduate school, more in the direction of trade school.
Oh, interesting.
It is, and I'll tell you exactly how I move through a coaching call with an individual, and people listening would, this is something that they can use right away, for themselves, for the people that they work with. It's simple. It's not always easy, but it's simple. So I think, so I want to go back for a second. We talk about coach. I think especially now, it like anything, we can make it really complicated. But as my friends in Farcaster know well, you want something to be popular, it usually doesn't begin by making it more complicated. And so I think it's important to simplify things. So the term coach actually goes back hundreds of years to Europe, where wealthy individuals hired somebody in a horse and a buggy to travel a distance to teach them something. And so that term came to describe I hired a coach, the horse and buggy, and then it came to describe the individual in there. So I'm getting coaching. So fundamentally, we're talking about an individual that you bring on to help you achieve your goals. And so my introduction to coaching goes back almost 4 decades. My dad was a strength and conditioning coach at the Virginia Military Institute for almost 45 years, maybe 45 years, just retired. Shout out to Pops. And what I saw him do more times than I could count was, talk about authenticity, establish trust with the person that you're working with, get to know their goals, their aspirations, help them make progress towards those things, reflect back things that help provoke awareness and shift behavior, and then celebrate with them when they achieve the goals that they have. So, you mentioned, so what's my definition of coaching? There are basically three things. Okay. The first is it's got to be co-creative. Right? You mentioned great coaches. Phil Jackson. Okay. Your neck of the woods. Phil Jackson's a great coach. Phil Jackson also had Michael Jordan. So it helps. It's got to be a co-creative process. Right? You can't be a coach in isolation. You have to be working with individuals. I think that's probably an obvious point, but it's one that's often overlooked. Okay? And so I've got to be in the practice of actively working with individuals. I've also got to be getting coaching myself, which I think is an important piece. So that's the first point. It's got to be co-creative. Second piece is I'm working with individuals to help provoke awareness, help them think differently about something. That's a foundation of change, an aha moment. And then the second piece, and this is really difficult, is once you have that awareness, help them shift behaviors. That's it. Establishing a co-creative process, working with somebody to help them think differently and do differently, provoke awareness and shift behavior. And so we talk about coaching. I think about it like this, right? You mentioned therapy. A therapist is excellent. I'm very pro therapy myself. Have had some amazing therapists in my life. They're excellent at going into the past to make sense of the present. Coaching is much more about, okay, David, where are you now? Where do you want to go? And tell me about that space in between. And it's a little bit different than advising, where I have expertise on something and I'm telling you, I'm putting something on the table for you to consider. It's different than mentorship, where maybe I am a few steps ahead of you in life and I'm going to reflect back to you some wisdom that I've gained. Different than consulting. I study nothing but this thing. I'm an expert at this thing and I'm going to tell you what to do. Think about it. You and I are getting in the car. If I'm your coach, I've got a contract with you to figure out where you want to go. Where the hell do you want to go? Do you want to go west? What does that look like? Are we going to SF? Are we going to LA? What neighborhood within LA? And then throughout the journey, I'm going to be making sure, hey, are we still making progress towards the goals that you had? Great. If not, let's recontract. So in a coaching call for me, it always starts with some version of these three questions. So what can people do listening to this immediately? Start asking these three questions. First is, what do you want to work on? Now, words are important. This is different than what do you want to talk about. We're not here to have a conversation. We're here to do work. And the heavy lifting, by the way, is on your side of the screen. So that's the first question. What do you want to work on? Second question is, why is this important? This is a timing question. I got to understand as your coach why it's not possible to ignore this any longer. Because once I understand why it's not possible, then I understand the sense of urgency and why this is so important for you to take care of this thing now. And then the last question is, in the time that you and I have, what does success in this conversation look like? So that's how we start a coaching call at the beginning. I've done a lot of talking in this conversation, but most of the conversations I have with individuals, I'm talking very little. I'm listening, asking questions, reflecting back. And then at the very end, I say, okay, what are you taking away from our time today? Any key takeaways, any key learnings? And that last 5 minutes, 10 minutes is a magical moment, because that's when people lock in that new awareness.
Yeah.
So that's an overview of how I operate. There are excellent coaches out there, by the way, that do things differently. So that's my version of it. That's what works for me. I've worked with over 80 individuals, spent over 800 hours working with these folks. And this is the thing that I keep coming back to, because it's a really helpful structure for any coaching conversation.
No, I love it. That you laid out so much good stuff that it's hard for me to get everything out, but you're laying out so much good stuff that I don't want to how do I put this? I'm very glad you're talking a lot. One of my goals on this podcast is really to share the wisdom that I've found through my own network that I think will be valuable to other people. And I'm very glad to hear and see that you feel comfortable sharing those things. But it struck me when you were talking about the process that it's like wildly unsurprising that you're interested in crypto actually, because if you were to describe a technology that is, you know, co-creative and has some incentive structures to like change behaviors and like brings new awareness, like you're very much describing a crypto network in many ways, right? Like a lot of this coaching is actually, I think, even relevant down to protocol design, where you want people working with each other. You want people, you know, being able to be aware of what's happening, which is effectively sort of the verifiability or the transparency of blockchain data. And then the incentive structures, like the economics that go into it. This is all very close parallels. So really interesting to hear that out loud from you, and then be very happily surprised that like it actually maps very closely to the way I think about a lot of things also on the growth side, right? Because when I talk to people about growth or extending reach, very frequently my advice is obviously not one-to-one, but it involves a lot of relationship sort of management, although it's often like out in the wild, right? It's probably not as deep as coaching, but you know, replying to people and tagging people in was a lot of the advice I gave to people who were trying to extend their reach, ways to bring awareness to yourself. And storytelling is a big part of, I think, of how, at least on the, you know, sort of marketing and BD side, I recommend people work on changing people's behaviors or bringing awareness to problems. So I think that all maps over very well.
Yeah. I appreciate I just learned something in this conversation. I like the way that you put growth as extending reach.
Yes. Yeah. I don't co-sign vanity metrics, which has not always put me in favor with everyone that I speak to, especially in the Web3 growth community. But I do very much feel that there are genuine, authentic ways to, you know, extend your reach, connect with your audience, and help people with a problem that you're solving. And I don't think it has to be so adversarial. I don't think it should be adversarial. I think this is sort of a byproduct, like I was talking about, of the way technology shifted over the past 10 years, but we're noticing a shift in other directions. And I think, not to do too hard of a pivot, but this is another one of the things that I had written down, because we connected initially on some Montessori education topics. When I was growing up, extremely niche. It felt, how do I put this? We were the weird kids is like the nice way to put it, right? Like there was a lot of what people would call granola or crusty today. And like, that was kind of it.
Do those kids wear shoes at school? What's going on there?
Yeah, exactly. Do those kids have shoes? Things like that. But as we move on, and I think you're seeing, you know, I am a bit of an iconoclast, but I'm mostly sort of we can make the world a better place type guy. And that often ends up being sort of like a speaking truth to power type lens that folks like yourself who've been involved with education now, and then, you know, interacting with people younger than myself, not to make myself sound too old at this point, but there's a zeitgeist shift. Absolutely. Right. In terms of what's been passed down through the generations, that I think is really interesting. So I don't want to keep you for too long. I also try to be very cognizant of our listeners' time, and you've given a lot of well, how would I describe it? I would describe it exactly the way you did. I would say it would be simple to digest, but difficult to execute type information. So very on brand. But I'd love to hear just a little bit of your thoughts on how things are shifting in education, and if there's anything that then spills over into any of the other topics, whether it be Farcaster, social media, coaching, how that shift at the younger age has now impacted how we view the world. I suspect you'll have some thoughts there that I think could be enlightening to me at the very least. And that's sort of my North Star. If I'm interested in something, I ask it, and then I hope my audience thinks it's cool afterwards.
Yeah. So the question, just so I got it, is like, what do from my perspective, working in schools, like what do I see shifting?
What are you seeing shifting? What has already shifted? And have you seen any of that play out in your day to day anywhere, really?
Yeah. Well, I think I'm a huge fan of Maria Montessori. I mean, I think, man, was she a visionary? And I think part of what she got right was she understood that the real customer of schools is the kid. So we're going to follow the kid. We're literally going to follow the kid, and we're going to make accessible the things that they want to play with, and then help teach them protocols that are useful for them, that make them feel good, right? So after you take the blocks out, you roll the mat back up and you put it. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. This is a thing you experienced.
It's
But
good.
so
It's
much
good to share with the audience, though.
But it's okay. So this is a thing that it happens in a lot of spaces. I don't want to be dismissive here. I think there are some remarkable educators and schools out there, and I've had the fortune of intersecting with many. But I think this is a challenge in schools. Like, who's the customer? The kids are the customer. It's not, we can fill that space with, teachers, administrators, parents, guardians. But at the end of the day, the most important, the most sacred experience in this whole ecosystem is the kid. And if they have a positive experience, then it is going to be horizon expanding for them. They come out of that school interested in more things, greater depth of knowledge on the things that they already loved. And that's how you actually affect change. And so in schools, I saw, work really hard to prove that things necessarily work in schools. But the one thing that I kept coming back to as an educator was, is it obvious to the kids that I care about them? I mean, think about your own experience. Who's your favorite teacher? It's an actual question for you. Who's your favorite teacher?
Who's my favorite?
I'm putting you on the
teacher?
spot here. You have to name just one.
I had an incredible. What would it have been? It would have been 6 to 9. It's how they grouped the ages at the Montessori school I was at. Named Sue, who really sort of let me run wild is a strong statement, but that's where I got a lot of what I would consider, at least for when I run into people who have gone through a similar experience, differentiated sort of learning aptitude. My sort of fervent nature around digging deep into things was very much cultivated around that age. Funnily enough, to your coaching point, I had another star player on my team I was math and science, he was English and history, and we pushed each other. But that experience, right? It's hard to talk about teachers without talking about classmates, and that sort of triumvirate was very much was quite a turning point for me as early as that was in my education career.
Okay, so I think you hit something that's really important, worth not jumping over. Everybody learns differently. Everybody learns differently. Now, what I think this means in terms of coaching is that those people then grow up to lead differently. Different combination of needs, usual behavior, stressors when our needs are unmet. And so Montessori, what I love about Montessori is that it has an appreciation for people learning differently. And I think that's something I try to practice in my coaching conversations, that I try to be present. There are a whole list of powerful questions that you can ask, but I think the best advice that I got is just shut your mouth. Don't even think about the next question until the person in front of you stops talking. Be that present. Imagine going into a bubble with people. Be locked in. And great schools do that. Great educators do that. I think great organizations do that too. They have a presence and a focus. When we started the conversation talking about authenticity, it's a thing that requires cultivation. It takes work. It's hard.
I couldn't agree more. It absolutely is. I think it's, at least from my perspective, I suspect you'll agree, it's also a journey, right? I think we give this advice sometimes, or we talk about these somewhat hand-wavy topics, and especially when I speak to other people and I'm giving, my own version of coaching, which is usually, growth growth centric, at least in sort of a professional capacity. I'm often reminding not only them, reminding myself that there isn't an end authentic destination, right? There's an end authentic destination. There's only the process of learning about yourself and learning how to communicate that more effectively. It's a journey to authenticity, and it's really not a destination. And I do get a little bit cranky at times when people feel entitled to some sort of response, or they feel entitled to a certain amount of reach. And I try to remain empathic, but in that sense, I always, and this is maybe a nice place to sort of put a bow on this podcast, where whether I think you're getting coached, or whether you're looking for growth in a product, or for your own personal social media accounts, whatever it may be, it is work, right? It is hard, but I think it's endlessly valuable to go on those journeys. And I just really grateful that there's folks like yourself in the world who are willing to share information, come on podcasts like this, and hopefully help people through some difficult times. So I would love to hear if you have any closing thoughts. But this has, for me, been absolutely wonderful. What a great way for me to spend some of my time.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for having me. I learned something in every single conversation. It's true in coaching. It's been true in this conversation today. I guess a lot of the folks that I link up with, we start the conversation, they'll say something like, I've been thinking about getting a coach for a while. So if you're listening and you're thinking about getting a coach, reach out to a coach. It certainly doesn't have to be me, but
it should be.
At Coach Cole, Farcaster. Yeah. DM's open. But seriously, I mean, give it a shot. Try it for 6 months. What's the worst that's going to happen? We just had the Olympics. Who's the last person that Simone Biles talks to before she goes out and performs? And the first person that she talks to when she finishes? Her coach. Her coach.
I thought you were...
Where'd you think I was going?
I thought you were going to say, when's the last time anyone won a gold medal without a coach?
Look, and I have learned so much from my friends in the world of sports and performing arts that the highest performers have coaches, right? So, set aside the ego, the pride, reach out to somebody. And there are a lot of good coaches out there too, that if the individual is coachable, they can be flexible in terms of compensation, or the organization is willing to pay for a coach. A lot of people don't know that. Go to your boss. Say, I want to get better at what I'm doing. Would you be supportive of getting a coach for me? 9 times out of 10, people are thrilled to have that conversation. So that's what I would say. If you're on the fence at all, if you're curious about coaching, have a discovery call with a coach. What's the worst that's going to happen?
I love it. Yeah, such a pleasure. Thank you once again for coming on, Coach Cole. That's been a Vibe Check. See you later, guys.